In this video, we're going to discuss some subtle issues in using date value controls in client-side calculations in a UX component. So to demonstrate the issue here, we're going to create a UX component that has two controls: start date, and the data type of this field has been set to date, and then the calc date, which also has been set to date, although this in this particular case doesn't really matter what calc date is set to. So because start date is a date control, it's going to have the date picker, and then you can see for calc date we've gone and we've made a calc field. So we can see here in the client side expression, we've said that the calc date, the value in this field, is a calculated field and it's equal to start date. So you can see there's our calculated field expression over there. So now when we go ahead and we run the component, when we make a selection from the date picker over here, whatever value we pick in the date picker, we would expect to see the exact same value reflected in the calc date field. So let's go ahead here and make a selection. But you can see now that what we see in the calc date field is not what we selected from the date picker. In fact, it looks quite different. And what's going on behind the scenes here is that the calculated field expression said that you're working with a field that has been designated as a date field. So what's going to happen behind the scenes is when the client-side JavaScript calculation is done, the value in this field is going to be actually converted into a JavaScript date object. And so what we're putting into this calc date over here is in fact the JavaScript date object that is then converted into a string. So what we get is the string representation of a JavaScript date object, and that's not what we want. Now the reason that we convert the date value here into a true JavaScript date object is that a more common use case in using date fields in calc expressions is that you actually want to do date calculations. You want to check to see whether one date value is before another date value or is after another date value, etc. And those calculations will only work correctly if in fact the start date field is turned into a true date object. But in this case we want the calc field here to be a string that's exactly equal to the start date. So in order to do that, we need to actually change our expression over here. And I'm going to go now to my my calculated field expression over here, and instead of calling just start date, I'm going to basically use a JavaScript function that I've got over here called format date, and I'll come back and explain what format date does. But I'm going to go back now to start date over there and then just wrap it in a function call. So we're basically calling a JavaScript function called format date and passing into it the value in start date, which is a JavaScript date object. So I'm going to go ahead now and let's go now and run this. So now we'll see that when I make my selection over here, basically the calc date is now a string that represents the same string that was in start date. So now let's go back to the JavaScript function, and before we go to the JavaScript function, I just want to point out over here that in this particular component the client-side date format has been set to month, month, day, day, year, year. So that's important because we're going to use this format when we format that date string. So let's go back here. So now basically here's our function, and what gets passed into this function is the start date value, which is a JavaScript date object, and we need to format that, and we can get whatever is set in this client-side date format here by referencing this global variable that gets set automatically for you. So A5 underbar date format represents the client-side date format that this UX component is using, and now we basically have a date object here, and alpha automatically adds to the prototype of date objects in. So we're continuing our discussion of the format date function over here. So the A5 underbar date format variable is automatically created when the UX component is run, and this variable contains the client-side date format that was defined in the properties over here. And then in addition to that, the alpha JavaScript library automatically adds to the prototype of date objects in JavaScript a function called toFormat that takes a date object and formats it into a string using this format string over here. So this little function over here is taking the date value in start date and then formatting it using the month, day, day, year format. And so you can see now that when the calc field executes, instead of getting the string version of a JavaScript date object, we actually get the string that we wanted. So as we've shown here in this video, working with date fields in client-side JavaScript calculations inside the UX component can be a little tricky if you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. Thanks very much for watching.